Welcome. Good afternoon in Europe, good morning in North America, good evening in the eastern part of the world from the European perspective. Welcome back to our Europa webinars. Today we have a session with Tobias Fenster, as we call it Hofleverancier in Dutch, or Hoflieferante am Deutsch. He has been presenting quite a number of sessions already, and I'm very thankful for that. Toby will have his session on automating and extending Azure DevOps, and he has a fully packed program. So not sure if it will be doable within the hour. We'll keep an eye on time. We will make sure that, let's say, around the next hour, we will stop shortly, and then what is remaining will be then discussed after that. So you can have a look at that in the recording later, but you could also stay and have and witness the story today. So welcome everybody, and let's go quickly through my slides. For those who are new, I could have skipped them for many of you, but I'm not always sure if there are some people newly attending. Your mic is muted, so you cannot use it to post questions, but use the GoToWebinar question window to post your questions. I'm the moderator. My name is Luc van Vugt, and I will be picking up your questions. Depending on the kind of questions, if there's linking into what Toby is just discussing, I will post the questions, and otherwise we will also push it to the end to make sure that, let's say, we get most of things done within the hour. Yes, our recording can be found on YouTube. There was something in the animation that I had to fix and I forgot to fix, but I'll fix that continuing after summer. And you'll get that in the newsletter, what will be the next session in the next season. So, thanks. Of course, this is the ending slide normally, but you have a couple of links here, and it might be at the end because we're fully packed. We're not going to show this at the end anyway, because there's no time for it, or we too much in the hurry. So I'm at the end of my short introduction. I'm going to hand over to Toby, and he is going to share his screen. So get on, Toby, and enjoy it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Luc, for inviting me, and maybe on behalf of a lot of participants, thanks a lot for making this happen. It's an awesome webinar series. I've joined a couple of times as a speaker, as you said, but I've also watched a lot of the recordings. So thanks a lot for making this happen. And of course, thanks a lot to ForNav as well. Yeah, the topic for today, automating and extending Azure DevOps. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Tobias Fenster. I'm the CTO for the Cosmo Consult Group. I'm a dual Microsoft MVP for both business applications and Azure. If you want to follow what I'm doing, this is my Twitter handle, my blog URL, my email address, and my LinkedIn. So you really should have anything that you might want to use to get in touch. Feel free to do so. I'm always happy to have technology conversations there. And also, if you're watching this in a week's time from now, I will also, for the first time in my career, become a Microsoft Regional Director. So that's not true yet, but will be true from July 1st. So one more thing I'm looking forward to. Okay, but for today's topic, as I said, we will be talking about Azure DevOps. This is the Azure DevOps logo. And if you've been following the Business Central community or Azure DevOps in general, then you will probably know that there are 5 parts to Azure DevOps, and those are the 5. So we have the pipelines for continuous integration and delivery. We have the board to manage, structure, and control your work. We have the repository to version control your code. We have the test plans to do manual and exploratory testing, and we have the artifacts to create and share packages. I think there has been a lot of content around the pipelines and repositories, and also to some degree on the artifacts and boards. In the Business Central community, I think less on the test plans might be an interesting topic for later. But what I actually want to do today is not focus on those standard parts. So we won't be doing a lot in those areas, but instead I want to focus on 3 parts. Those parts are reading and exporting data from Azure DevOps. It will be automating things in Azure DevOps or writing to Azure DevOps. And the last part will be extending Azure DevOps. So we will look into how we can get data out of Azure DevOps, get data into Azure DevOps, and if what Azure DevOps is offering for us isn't enough, how we can add additional stuff. And that basically will be the agenda for today. So I will go through those 3 topics. We will look at a very limited amount of slides and then a lot of actual hands-on code. So my idea for today wasn't to provide you with a scenario that we will follow, which usually is what I do when presenting stuff. I try to come up with a scenario that fits everything. But as this is really a very broad topic, and the goal for today is to introduce you to all the technologies and all the ways that are covered here. I don't have a base scenario, but we will just basically go through the different technologies, the different ways to do things, and look at small samples that don't have a big picture to paint, but really are some samples of the technology that we're going to use. The first topic is reading and exporting data out of Azure DevOps. So we will look at the REST API, which is basically a way to read data as JSON, as a text representation. We can do queries. So if you're familiar with Azure DevOps, you can you have a query language, and we can use those in the REST API as well. We will look at individual work items, and we could do a lot more using the REST API. That's very quick and easy. We will see from 0 to getting data that's done very quickly. The second option that we looked into is the .NET Client library, which allows us to read data as objects. So we have a typed language here. We have more comfort. We have more options as with the REST API, in the sense that we're now in a typed language, and there are just more possibilities there. It is a bit behind of the REST API, so the preview stuff and the early adoption stuff is coming to the REST API first, and only then to the .NET Client library. And sometimes you might want to use an undocumented API, and I'll also show a sample of that. And that, of course, is only possible through the REST API because there won't be anything in the .NET Client library. And the last thing that I want to show is the Office integration, which is very simple because we don't have any programming language or tools there. We're just going to use Excel, and yeah, that's of course not as flexible. It just does what it does, but if that is what you need, then you can for sure go with it, because that's very easy to handle and set up. Okay, so the demo that I've prepared for today is, just to recap, we're going to get data out of Azure DevOps. So that's what I try to show with those golden arrows. So we're going to get data out of Azure DevOps, not the other way around. And we will always look at that diagram to understand in which direction we're going and what we're using. So we now have code running outside of Azure DevOps, and it's just going to get the data. The demo that I prepared is running a query and working with the results, looking at the work items in a project, and then getting detailed information about work items. I've also included a couple of URLs here where you can see how the REST API is documented. You can look at the extension documentation, and then there are a couple of samples as well, and you might want to use those afterwards to get started yourself. But without further introduction, let's go with the first demo. And to give you an idea, I'll first show the documentation. So this is the REST API reference. That is a very, very good documentation, in my opinion. So you can see all the different parts that are in Azure DevOps and how you can work with them. So the first thing we want to do is we want to look at work items. So let's look at work item tracking. And for example, look at work items and listing work items. And then it's always the same structure. If we look at the example, we can see here, this is the request that we're going to do, the HTTP request. It has devazure.com in the beginning, the DevOps organization, the project, and sometimes the team. And then it's the actual URL of the API. And what we're seeing here is that we need IDs of work items. So we can't directly access them just by knowing the organization and the project, but instead we need to have an ID. Getting IDs, for example, is possible by using queries, as I just said in the beginning. So we will just ask basically Azure DevOps using a search language of what we're going to use. So we can do query by using the work item query language. And we can see here, this is another URL. We can just use that one. And in the example section, we can also see that we just need to provide the query that we want to run, and then we can go ahead. The other question that we need to solve is how we want to authenticate, because not everyone is going to be allowed to talk to Azure DevOps, get the information, but instead we need to do some authentication. And for that, if I go back to the starting page, we also have information here about authentication, and I should have noted down the exact link. Let me see. Exactly, that's under creating the request, we have the authentication information, and there are a lot of different options depending on the thing that you want to do. What we want to use now is called a personal access token that just can be created through the GUI. I don't want to go through that. It's just a bit of clicking in the administration, and then you have your personal access token, and we can use that to do the authentication. So what we want to do now is we want to run a WCL query. So for that, I will just copy the sample request here. I'll switch to Visual Studio Code. Let me put that on the right screen. So we have it here. We will use that as the second demo, but I'll want to show you that this is really created from scratch. So I have a completely empty page. I'll toggle the screencast so you see what I'm doing. And I'm now going to set the language mode to HTTP. Oh, HTTP. So now we have the HTTP mode enabled, and I'll just paste the request that we've seen before. And in that case, you can see that this is addressing a organization that's called Fabricam. Of course, we want to do something else, and I've prepared a couple of variables for that. So I'll just paste those in here. So you can see we want to use an organization. It's named like this, and when we need it, we will use this project and this team. And we can just use the variables in here. So I want to address this org. I just use IntelliSense, and now I have the org in here. As I said, we want to use authorization, the personal access token. I have that as a hidden variable. So that is in here. And we have the content type of application JSON as documented here as well. So as you can see here, the request body is the text of the WCL query, and in the examples below, you can see here, this is the JSON file. So I will just copy that one as well. And for a particular project, we're not using that many tasks, but instead user stories. So I will fix this to say that we want to have user stories. So it's going to select the ID, the title, and the state from all work items when they are user stories, and it will not include the closed ones and not include the removed ones, sorted by priority and by created date. And with that, I will just click send request, and hopefully, if I didn't miss anything, we should get an answer. Here it is. The most important thing to begin with is that it's request code 200, which means it's okay. Then we get a lot of technical information, and then we get the actual query information. So we can see the columns here. I'll close that one. We can see the sort columns. I also close that one. And now we can see all the work items that have been requested. And if you remember, I said that to use the other API, we always need to use IDs. And in that case, we get a lot of IDs, 73, 74, 75, and so on. So we can use those as well. So now we want to have more information about those work items. We can use the work item batch API for that. So I click on that link as well. And when it loads, we will see that in order to use that, I go to the examples again. We need to do a post request. I copy that one, put it in my Visual Studio Code file. again, now I once again need to replace the organization with my variable. So I'll just put that one in here. Oh, need to remove those. So we have that one. And we look at the request body that we need to send that basically contains the IDs and the fields and the work items that we want to show. So I copy that one as well, bring it in here, and put in my authorization and content type headers. So now we should have everything in place. We need to replace the IDs with those that you can see here. So I'll just use 37 over here, 73, 74, 75, 74 and 75, and the request. And now we have the information. You can see we have requested ID, title, work item type, and remaining work. What we get back is ID, work item type, and title, because we don't do remaining work, or we don't use remaining work. That's just to show you that you don't need to have all the fields in here. If we would query across multiple projects or multiple work item types, and you would have some kind of data only in a specific work item type, you can just run that query. If the data is there, it will be returned, and if it's not there, it just will be omitted. So we have a couple of issues here. User stories with the title that we need to predefine a dashboard, have a template of a backlog, and have a release pipeline template, something like this. And I also can have the URL for different versions or for the current version, so I can use those as well to get information about the particular work item. So I can reuse those and go from there. So that is the example for using the REST API directly using Visual Studio Code. You could do the same in tools like Postman or in PowerShell or whatever. I personally like to do it in VS Code because that's where I spend most of my development time. But of course, there are other tools who can do the same. And just to let you know, the extension that I'm using here is called REST Client. You can just find it on the extension marketplace for Visual Studio Code. Just search for REST Client, and there's one that has, I think, millions of likes or millions of downloads, and that's the one that you want to use if you have the same preference that I do. The second one that I wanted to show you is how to do this in C#, and because that would involve a bit more typing, I have the sample already prepared. If you're familiar with what a C# program looks like, you will see that this is a very simple scenario. We have the beginning write line of hello world just to show that we're up and running. Then I'm creating a credential. Again, I'm using the personal access token here. And then for the first demo, I will use the list work items function that you can see here. That one again is defining the query. That's exactly the same that we've used before. It's just giving us the user stories that are not closed and removed. We enter the URL here. So we have a work item tracking HTTP client that's basically providing us with the functionality to query for work items. We give it the URL, that's devazure.com, and then the organization name, give it the credential, and then we can query by WCL. WCL is, again, the work item query language. So we get the result here. Then we convert it to an array and iterate through the IDs. If that is empty, we will return nothing found. And if we have IDs, then we will do something similar to the batch request that we've done before, because we're again asking it to get work items with details. We give it the IDs that we want, and we give it the fields that we want. And the fields again are, in that case, title, ID, and state. And we just put it out to the console. So if I just run that one, hit F5, then it should hopefully compile and get started in a second. And again, this is basically doing the same that we've just done with the REST API. Now we're doing it in C#. So if you want to generate a console application or a web application or whatever your target scope is, you could use C# to do that as well. So the compilation is done, and it should hopefully start in a second. Oh no, it's not yet done. Now it is. The debugger opens up. So we do have some progress here. And I'll switch to the debug console. Starting, let's make that a bit bigger. The orange ones are just debug outputs. We can ignore those. Here is the hello world in light blue. And now it's requesting information from Azure DevOps and should hopefully put them out in a second. Again, the orange ones are just debug information that you can ignore for now. And here we have the information. We have the ID, we have the title, and we have the status. And if you remember, last time we requested 73, 74, and 75. So the same information that we got using the REST API, now we have using the C# part. The last example of getting information from Azure DevOps I wanted to show you is the Office integration. So for that, I will switch to Excel. And I'll just open an empty Excel file. Use the Team plugin. That's a plugin that you can just freely download and install. It's the official one from Microsoft, and I say new list. Again, same as with the other APIs, I need to let it know to which organization I want to talk to. So it's now loading the ones that I've previously used. If you run this for the first time, then you just need to provide the URL. And this is opening on the wrong screen. Let me put it here. So it now, again, is connected to devazure.com/ccppi. It knows that this is the project collection, and it has one project that's called General. And you can see here that it's already pre-authenticated with my user. So I click Connect. And that now allows me to either do a query or do an input list. Input list would be to create new work items or get individual work items. For now, we want to just do a query. So in that case, I can have the predefined queries assigned to me or followed work items. If I define a query in Azure DevOps and put it either in my queries or in the shared queries, then I can use them from here as well. I can't put in the query language like we used before. You can only work with predefined queries here. So I go to assign to me, click OK, and now it's fetching the information from Azure DevOps as well, using the same technology, and shows those work items in here. So you can see a couple of user stories, a couple of bugs, the titles, the state, area path, iteration path, and so on. If you want to change the columns that are included here, you can also do that using setup. And if I go back to Teams, that would be here, choose columns. You can also edit the areas and iterations that you want to show. And interestingly enough, you can also publish, and we will do that in a minute to show you that we can also write data. And if you share this with someone else, or you open the same Excel file tomorrow and you know that your work items have changed, you just need to click on refresh. So somewhat similar to the Excel integration that you know from Business Central. Okay, so that was the first demo for reading data. The second part, as I said, is about automating or writing data. So this is about bringing data into Azure DevOps, automating manual steps, and automate small workflows by calling other systems. We will also be using the REST API, the .NET Client, and Office, and we will be using a new technology that's called service hooks. You also know that from Business Central, if you've looked closely, because they also have the webhooks in the APIs. What we can do here, we can react to events in DevOps. For example, when a work item is created, when code is committed, when a build has failed, when someone has created a comment, lots of things that are happening in Azure DevOps, we can then call something else by either executing a predefined action, and we will look into a minute what those actions could be, or we can call an arbitrary endpoint, which then in turn can do whatever you have created that endpoint to do. So you can basically program it to do anything you want. For example, when a new work item comes in, then you could create a WhatsApp message that notifies you that there is a new work item. A lot of things that you just can think of. If you can program it in any kind of language, then you should be able to do it and react to those. So we're basically now looking into pushing data into Azure DevOps and also getting notifications through the service hooks. so that we can do something else afterwards. And the sample would be to create a work item, to make a project setting for the APIs, or to check a list, to check the list of predefined actions, so you get a better feeling of what we can do with the service hooks and create a custom webhook. To do the creation, we once again look at our REST API, we look at the work items, and we look at create. And when it loads, we will see that this is again kind of similar. I will just look at the example again, copy that one, and put it in my little VS Code file. Just close those as we don't need them right now. So we go back to the REST client, put in the post. There's something I want to make you aware of. As I said, the documentation is very good, but it sometimes happens that they have issues with the samples, let's put it that way. For example, they have the project as variable while the organization still is hard-coded. So you need to kind of look a bit at the samples to really make sense of them. So we will replace that one with our org, and we will replace that one with the project variable that we have here. And then we need to enter a type. And that one, for example, would be a user story. And because this is HTTP, we need to replace the blank with a $20. So now we tell it that we want to create a user story, and we need to add the information, what content it should have. In that example, we will just add a title. So let's put that one in here. We also need to have the authorization, and because we're sending data, we also need to add the content type. And the value for the title would be, this is our Areopath sample user story 1. And let's send the request again. And we get a response. Oh, we get a bad request. Oh yeah, I was wrong. But now you can see how you get errors, hopefully. So we can see this is a bad request by the feedback here. We get a message here that says we wanted to send in application JSON, but it should be application JSON patch JSON. If you know more about REST APIs, then that actually is very weird, but that's the way it works in here. Unfortunately, I can just change that one. So just to show you, if you are lucky, then you will get an error message that looks like this. What can also happen if I remove the authorization header just for a second and send that request, then you will see either a not found. And if you look at the object move to, you can see something like sign in down here. So basically that means that you're unauthorized. That should be a, let me think, 401 or 403 actually. So sometimes you see not authorized right in the top, and sometimes you get a 302 that tries to redirect you to the sign-in page. And then you know that you need to add your authorization information. If I put it back in and send the request again, now we have a 200 OK, and we can see that there is a new work item with the ID 84. It, of course, was created by me. It's a user story. It's new. And we have the title here. So when we look at the Azure DevOps sample later in the browser, then you will see that this has actually been created and now exists. But to do the exact same thing in the C# API, to show you that one as well, I will switch back to my C# code. And this time we're not going to call the list work items, but instead we're going to call the create work items or create work item one. And that one has the same information that we've seen before. So this is the information that we've exactly seen here. So if you remember that one and that one, they look very similar. we just want to add something. We want to add the system title, and in that case, that's 1. We already have one with ID 1, so I'll change that to 2. Then once again, we need a work item tracking HTTP client connected to the particular organization that we want to use and give it the credential. And then we create a new work item. We give it that particular document. We need to give it the team, and we need the project, and we need to give it the type, in that case a user story. And then as a result, we get a new work item back, as you can see here. And I just output the ID and the title that was created. So if I save that one and run it, let's see what happens. Again, it's building. And then hopefully the debugger starts. Go to the debug console. Oh, that's not yet there. Okay, here is the compiler. It's restoring the dependencies and compiling. I know you've heard that in a lot of demos, but that usually is a lot quicker. So there indeed seems to be something with my machine right now, but again, it's building, and that is basically 100 lines of code, so that should be a lot quicker. Let's see if it goes through.
While we're waiting, I have a small question.
Sure.
When you did the reading of the data, you did not use a project. With the writing you do, is it mandatory for the writing? I reckon it is, but not mandatory for the reading.
Yes, that's actually true, because every work item has a unique ID per organization. So that means it's always the same. If you just read it and you give it an ID, then it knows to return the right things, because it only has the same ID once in the whole organization. But if I create it, it needs to know in which project you want to create it. So that's why I need to add that information for creating.
Clear.
Okay, now we see that it has created a work item. The last one was 84, so no surprise, we get ID 85 now, and it's the area per user story 2. So that one has been created as well. So we've now seen how to create that work item using the REST API and also using the C# code. Now for the last way, let's do an Excel. Let's do the Excel way. For that, I will close that one. I don't want to save it. Create a new one and go to my team integration as well. I go to new list, and this time we're not selecting, select the same organization, but we're not selecting the query list, but this time we're using the input list. And as you can see here, it says enter new or get individual work items. So this is for adding new work items. And that works very, very easily. I can just put in the name. So I want to use Areopa user story 3 by now. I need to let it know which work item type we want to use. That should be a user story, and it automatically pre-fills the states. For new ones, I can only do new, and as reason, I can also only do new. If we work with that one later, then we could use different stuff, and I can even assign it. For example, I'll assign that one to me. By now, nothing has been created on the server side, but if I go to team and publish again, then it has created those and it has gotten the ID. So now we have also a work item with ID 86. And now let's go to the project in the browser. So look at the work items in that particular project. And we will see a lot of others, but we should hopefully see our Areopa user story 1, 2, and 3 as well. So let's see, it's starting, we get the backlog. I'll zoom in a bit.
You could have used your preset queries too in the Excel to add an extra line without an ID and then publish it.
No, that one actually is a reading query, so I don't think you can add those because you said it in the beginning to be a reading one. You need to kind of set the way when you start that one. So if we go down at the very bottom, we can see our Areopa sample user story 1. We can see the user story 2, and we can see the user story 3. So all three of those have been successfully created. And no matter which way we use, they are now there. If we, for example, click at the last one, we should see that this is now having AD 86 exactly. So this is the user story that we just right now have created, and it's just a regular user story like you would have created it in the GUI. We could, of course, have added the description, acceptance criteria, whatever fields you have in there. You can also add custom fields. So if you have customized the work items, for example, then you can add those as well. There's no issue with those.
As I already mentioned, there sometimes can be a case where you want to access an API that is not 100% documented, or where you just can't find the right samples or the right configuration, the right input, whatever to make work what you want to make work. So in that case, there is an easy trick to do that, and I'll show you how that works by going back to the settings of my project. Now, actually, this is an API that is rather well documented, but it serves good as a sample of what we can do. So you might go to the team configuration in here and then find out that for the capacity and burn down calculations, we have a couple of days that are selected, Monday to Friday, but maybe you want to include Saturday. And you want to do this automated, again, using the REST API, because at least as far as I know, there is no good way to do that in the C# library. And instead of looking at the documentation, what you can also do is just to open the development tools that you can see on the right side here. I'll clean everything up because we don't worry about the things that have already happened. We're just interested in what is going to happen now. And now what I want to do is I want to enable Saturdays. So I click here, and then I can immediately see that there has been a call to something on the back end, and this happens to be something in the API, as we can see here. So indeed, a call to the REST API has been triggered. I can see which URL to use. I can see that we need to do a patch request. I can see if I scroll down here that I need to set the API version. And if I scroll to the very bottom, I can also look at the actual content that I need to send. So in order to use this, it's quite easy. I'll just copy the URL here, go back to my Visual Studio Code project, add a new request. You've seen that this was a patch request. I'll add the URL. Now, if you start to work more with the API, then you will notice that this is actually the org. And then we need the project. Oh, wrong one. Project. And as we're changing a team setting, in that case, we also need a team. We need the authorization and the content, and I'll just copy that one over here. And then we had the actual payload of the request. So I'll go back down here and copy that one as well. Go back to Visual Studio Code and edit and send that request. As a response, now I get the information that I forgot to add the API version. That's also good to know. That is something that you always need to add. I've just shown you, you can find it in those requests, typically as part of the accept, but we can just copy that one here as well. Go back to Visual Studio Code, and as before, add it as a query parameter. So I'll try to send that one again, and now it says okay. So we've hopefully successfully changed the setting. To verify that, I'll go back in here, close the developer tool, and do a reload. And hopefully, magically, the Saturday has disappeared. No, it hasn't. Yeah, and the reason for that is that I had it in here. Of course, I need to remove it as well. Send the request, go back here, reload. And now the Saturday is gone. So again, that's just an example when you can't find the right API, when you can't find the right parameters to do what you want to do, just open the developer tools and check what the browser is doing. That is not working 100% of the time, and sometimes the requests are really obscure and it's difficult to figure out what is happening. But chances are, if you run into something, you know that you can do it from the browser manually, then you will be able to find it using the developer tools, what you need to do to automate that one. Okay, so that was the part about using the API to change things. Now, as we said before, another way to change things or to automate things is using a service hook, and that's what I want to do right now as well. So I'll go to the service hooks here. And as I said, there are a lot of predefined things that you can already do. So I'll remove that one. That was from a previous test. Yes, and if I create a new one, then you can see there are lots and lots of integrated services that you can work with. For example, AppWayer for your builds, Azure Service Bus to integrate there, Azure Storage to put something in there, and Azure App Service, for example, when code is pushed to your repository, then it would deploy a web app or something like this. So you can see those are the services. You can see which events are supported, and there are a lot of events in Azure DevOps that you can use to trigger your service hook, and then something is happening on the side of the other service. And usually, if you select one of those and then just hit next, you will see a message like this. This subscription has to be configured from the other side, from the consumer service, and that usually is the case for those predefined services. So you're doing this on, so to speak, the other side. The one exception to that rule is the webhook, because this is something that is completely configurable. So what we want to do here is no matter what happens in Azure DevOps, we can then do a post to an HTTP endpoint. So we can just send our content somewhere, something has happened, this is the context, and I'll show you how that works. If I click on next here, then we can select the trigger. Let's say if someone commented on a work item, I could filter this, so the trigger would only happen on specific area paths, on specific work items, tags, whatever. But now, for now, let's keep that empty. And then we need a URL where we post something to. This usually would be a web service that you have created or that you're using from somewhere else. But as I just want to do an easy sample, I'll take request bin. That one just allows me to create an endpoint that gets a request so we can see what's happening. And I'll copy that endpoint URL, go back here, put it in. If I wanted to, I could accept untrusted SSL certificates. So if this is something where you have your own self-signed certificate, that is something that you would enable. In this case, I don't need it. I can do authentication. I could add specific HTTP headers. And in here, I can define which resources we want to send. For now, we'll keep the defaults, but we'll play with that in a second. But I'll just go right ahead and do a test. So you can see that this just tested that someone had a comment on a bug. And if we go to request bin, we can now see that a post request has appeared. And then you can see, okay, we have the message here, we have the message as text, we have the message as HTML, we have the message as Markdown, then we have a detailed message, we have the resource where this is happening, so we get all the information about the bug, all the fields in the bug, when it was created, when it was changed, the title, and so on. So I really have a good idea of in which context the event has happened or was triggered. Usually, I think you wouldn't need that much information. So what I can also do is I can go back in here and say, I only want the minimal resources to send. I only want the text message, and I want no details at all. So if I test again, close that one, go back here. We have another request that came in, and now you can see it's a lot shorter. The detailed message is gone. The message contains only the text, and I only have a link to the resource. So if I kind of just want to ping something has happened and maybe a minimal text there, then this would be the way to go. No need for all the other content that is there. But now let's test if it really works. So I'll finish that one. That means that now we have set up our webhook. And if I go back to the list of work items, we have our Areopa user stories in here. And then we have the discussion where the comments are. So let's add something like this should trigger a webhook call and save that one. This is not 100% real time, so this will take a bit until it appears here. So if you really have something that's very time critical, then webhooks might not be the way to go. But here we are, and now you can see this has happened on the user story, Areopa sample user story. I added a comment, and now I would need to go back there to find out what exactly the comment was. Yeah, but that kind of shows you the way how you can create your custom webhooks. So you can basically send the information to anywhere you want to, and if you implement the web service side on that, then you're basically able to do anything using automation from Azure DevOps. It's a bit more complicated. You need a bit more setup. So if you can live with the services that are already pre-created, and you've seen there are lots and lots of those, then it would be easier if you just go with one of those. For example, if you just want a message in Teams when someone has created a work item, or you want information in Teams when someone has created a bug or commented somewhere, then it's easier to just use the pre-created Teams integration. But if you have something that's more complicated, where no predefined thing is available, then you could just use that one. And to give you an idea of the things that you can do in the API, I want to go back somewhere else, look at my cheat sheet. This is the URL that I wanted to use, because I want to show you in one of our projects what we're doing using that kind of integration. We're actually using the REST API because it's, as I said, feature complete, and it also allows you to sometimes do things that are not documented yet. So that's the reason why we use it in here. And what you can do, for example, is to create a new project. So when we create a new project, it's just a matter of clicking in our tool saying new project, and then this is set up. It has a lot of basic content that comes in. For example, if I go to the, sorry, not the boards, the backlogs is where I wanted to go. Then we already have a pre-created structure that is based on a process map. So you can see here we have an epic structure, we have sub-epics, and then we have features. In some areas we even have user stories. But that way we are sure that we're not, we don't need to create a lot of content in Azure DevOps, but we're just using the API to pre-create all this. And if we have found out in the pre-sales phase with a customer that some of those epics or features don't make sense in that particular project, we just don't add them, or we add them and add a comment that they are out of scope for now. On the technical side, we are also pre-creating repositories. So this is a space that if you followed what my colleague Michael Megel is sharing, then this might be familiar, because he has talked about those as well. There is a repository for DevOps. So this is where all our DevOps automation is stored. We have the YAML pipelines for different versions and so on. So this is automatically created when we create the project. And the second thing that is created is the base for the Business Central project. So we have the workspace file, we have a structure for our app, including the app.json, and we have a structure for our test app that includes everything in here, and even has sources to install and the base of a test code unit in here as well. So the idea is really to make sure that a developer who wants to start has anything pre-created. They don't need to worry about the structure of the project. And on the other hand, we are sure that all projects are at least somewhat similarly structured, so we can easily switch between projects. What we're also doing is we create a branching policy. So we make sure that we always have a reviewer, as you can see here. We have a linked work item. So if a pull request gets done, then it needs to have a work item so we know where it's coming from. We're always doing squash merges, and we are doing build validation, which means that the automated pipeline needs to go through before a pull request can be merged. If the pipeline fails, then the pull request can't be merged. So those are things that you can automatically include, and just make sure that those rules are happening in all of your projects. No one forgets to set that up. No one does something differently without a good reason. So we're sure that more or less our projects are running in the same direction. We also, as I said, are pre-creating pipelines. So if I go here, you see that we have a pipeline that's not terribly complex, but also not that trivial. It starts a container, it runs the build and test, it creates a release, and then it stops the container. So this is, again, already pre-created, nothing that a project manager or developer needs to worry about. We just create this through the API. We have everything in place by the great work of my colleague Michael, and then this is just pushed into a new project. And the last thing that I wanted to show you, we also get the artifacts pre-set up. So we have a view and we have feeds in here that are used for pushing in the results and the app that is created and the sources for when that app was created. And now that that is in place, we're just able to use a release pipeline to push this to the customer. Again, this is just to give you an overview of the things that you can do using the API. We haven't seen everything, how it works, but we're using the technology that I've shown you, REST APIs, to just push that stuff and bring it in. Okay, this concludes the part about automating and writing. So we can go on to the last part, and the last part is extending Azure DevOps. That means that if Azure DevOps doesn't do something that you want it to do, then you can check the marketplace. This is very similar to the Visual Studio Code marketplace, where you have a lot of resources that are often free and often open source, so you can just use them, look at the sources and improve them. And if you want, you can also use the Microsoft DevLab extensions that are on there that Microsoft uses to get feedback on new features. So if they plan something new, oftentimes it will appear on the marketplace as an extension. They ask for feedback, and if it's good, then it will end up in the project. If it's not good, then they will stop working on that one. And also we can create our own extension, and I will only very briefly jump into that one to show you that this is just a typical HTML TypeScript using React as a front end and Sass for styling stack. So whoever is able to do web development should be able to quite easily develop Azure DevOps extensions as well. That is, if you want to run a graphical extension, you can also do things like add additional tasks for your pipelines, or there are multiple ways to extend Azure DevOps. But for now, I will want to show you those that are available for the user and easily seen because they have a graphical front end. So basically what we're doing, we're adding new features. They can read, they can write, as everything is possible through either the marketplace or just your own extension. And that way we extend what is already there and bring in our own building blocks. So what I want to show you is we will look at the marketplace, see a couple of extensions. We will look into the extension samples, and we will see how we can, for example, change details in a work item using code. So I'll go to the marketplace, and the easiest way to reach it is using the icon in here and click on Browse Marketplace. And there are a couple ones that I wanted to show you. The first one is delivery plans. That one, I'll zoom in a bit. That one adds quite complex graphical elements in here. So you can see basically it's used to schedule stuff across sprints and across teams. But I wanted to show you that it completely adds a new kind of user interface that isn't there in Azure DevOps before. So this is a completely new view that gets added. So really you can do a lot of complex things in Azure DevOps extensions. You're not limited to what is already there, but you can really add new stuff in here. To go back, let's see if I can find one that is from the dev test lab. Yeah, for example, that one. So you can see here, this one is provided by Microsoft Dev Labs, and they usually have some information in the end. No, that one doesn't, sorry. But usually it has a paragraph in here that says, this is coming from the Dev Lab team. This might end up in the product or not. Please give us feedback on that one. And then we, of course, have a lot of community-driven ones. So, for example, we are using ALOps that probably a lot of you know, created by Waldo and colleagues. And that one, if I click here, you can see it has pricing, it has a 30 days free trial. So all of that is also possible. It has documentation. And what usually is the case for community content is that it links to a GitHub repository where you can create issues and get feedback or get support. Or if it's an open source one, then you usually have the sources there as well, and you can contribute to those. Also, if you find something that does something that's similar to what you want to do, then you can just look at the sources of other extensions and find out how they are doing stuff. So you can mimic that or do something similar on that area. So that's basically the predefined ones, but what if we want to create our own ones? There is a very good repository on extension samples. I've added the link there as well. And I want to show you two things. I'll need to check my cheat sheet on that one again. What did I want to show you? Exactly. So just as an example of the things that you might be able to do, I go back to my project here. So if you want to add a feature, but just enable it conditionally, you can integrate into the preview features. So those are standard preview features that Microsoft provides. And then there's feature ABC and feature ABC in version 2. And you can switch them on and off. So you can allow your users to use preview stuff in your extension or not. We can also integrate in a lot of ways in here. So this adds a sample hub that has a lot of demos. For example, we can show a banner. We can show a banner with buttons, so we can interact here. We can show a toast message here. We can show a simple message here. So you basically get the idea. There's a lot of interaction. We can add a lot of stuff where you want to bring in your own repository. We can also deeply integrate in other places. If I look at the repository switcher here, for example, this would be an action that is added by an extension. So whatever comes up as a menu, whatever comes up as a selection, chances are that you can extend it with your own extension there as well. Or for example, if I look into the pipelines and a pipeline run, and then you get those ones over here called pills. You can add those from an extension as well if you annotate it, if you want to annotate it with some kind of information. Now, for the actual code that is happening, I want to show you a quick example for the work item form group. And what it does, if we scroll up a bit, that one extends the work item form group component. So this adds another component to my work item form. What it adds is a button, as you can see here. So this has a very simple text, click me to change the title. It links to the onClick function. If I drill down here, then I can see what it does is it gets the field value of the title and then it sets the field value by adding that Areopa webinars, of course, are the best. So if we go back to our project and to the work items, select something here, and then let it load, we should see our custom button appear here. So you can see for now it's disaster recovery. If I click here, then you can see now it has changed the title. So you can very seamlessly integrate here, and the actual code that needs to be done is very simple. It looks similar to the C# interface that we see, or a client that we've seen before. And if you take some time to look through the samples and have some basic knowledge about TypeScript, then it should be quite easy to add your own stuff if you need it. And working with the backend also is very easy, kind of similar again to the C# interface. You're getting a service. In that case, it would be the iWork item form service. And then we use that one to get the value from a field and to set the value in a field. So that's very easy. As you can see, you also get some help over here. So I found it really quite easy to get up and running there. The last thing that I want to show you about extensions is the sample that we are using to integrate Office 365. So if I go here in one of the work items in the same project as well, we use this to add concept information. So we have a link to a file that is somewhere in SharePoint, so in Office 365. And if I click on the integration link here, I immediately get the preview, in that case, of a PowerPoint, but that also could be a Word document, an Excel document, whatever. So if you have a concept that is integrated here, you don't want to edit in the little full text editor that is already there, because maybe you have more content, or you want to have versioning, or want to work collaboratively in the same document, then you can use this. And it has a quick integration into the edit mode as well. So if I need to change it, I can do that as well directly from the browser or opening it up in the desktop application. But if I'm just someone who wants some background, then I can just look at the document in here. And that is also done through an extension. That's actually quite easy. It adds a field here, it gets the information, creates the URL, and then it adds the frame over there. So that way we're able to just directly look at those. Okay, to get back, those were the things that I wanted to show you. Over here, you have the marketplace, you have the extension documentation, and you have the samples that I showed you. Definitely worth taking a look and finding out how that works. So with that, I'm done. We looked into reading data, exporting data, we looked into writing data and automating little workflows, and we looked into extending Azure DevOps in case it doesn't do what you want it to do. So basically, remember, there's not only the 5 major pillars of Azure DevOps, but you can do a lot through the API as well. With that, I say thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thanks a lot to Luc for having me on the webinar again. Let's see what the future brings. If you have any topics, if you maybe want to do a deep dive into creating your own extension for Azure DevOps or something like that, just let me know, let Luc know, and we might schedule something in the future as well. Thanks a lot.
A big thanks to you, Toby, for this great presentation. And to everybody who has been watching and listening. We might see each other in 2 weeks when we have, in our 20th webinar, Dimitri Katson on enums in Business Central. So for now, good evening, good afternoon, good night, and till next time. Bye-bye.